So today I want to make a video about this tweet from Donald Trump Jr. and then Stefan Molyneux's reply. Now, environmentalism, the carbon tax, climate change, all this kind of stuff is one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue that's talked about in Canada on both sides of the political spectrum, obviously for different reasons. But I'll just get right into it and then give my quick thoughts. So basically, Donald Trump Jr. tweets out, rather than try to pretend she knows something about economics, she could further her cause by being much more, or cause much more by going to places like China and India and make sure they do something about their pollution. Why don't she go directly to the worst offenders? I don't know exactly who he's referring to. My guess is Cortez, but I'm not perfectly sure. You'd have to go check it out. He links to a CNBC article, but I'm not getting into that. And then Stefan Molyneux replies in, I think, a very good way. Why would environmentalists go to China? The purpose of environmentalism is totalitarianism, and China is already totalitarian. Now, this is basically the whole thing that you need to understand with climate change is that the goal isn't to fix the environment. Now, I'm sure most people that are watching this already know that, but for the people that don't, the goal isn't to care about the environment, to fix the environment, any of that kind of stuff. And like I say, the obvious contradictions are if the goal was to fix the environment, then you'd be against the national debt because having a national debt means that the government and therefore the individual population can consume more, which means more climate change, basically. Another contradiction, too, is that if you're against climate change, you should be against people being obese because obese people eat a lot more food. And if they eat a lot more food, that means trucks and planes and however people get their food need to be, driving and flying a lot more to make up for that, difference in the extra food that they're eating, which means more contribution towards climate change. And the left is big on their fat pride nowadays, so they don't care about climate change. Like I say, if they cared about climate change, they would address those two obvious contradictions. Now, there's more of them. There's the ones where you have these, the Obamas of the world that their top science advisor, who was a big ocean rising, climate change guy, but turns out Obama just bought a house that's literally right along the ocean for I think it was over $10 million. So clearly they don't believe what they preach. That's the first thing you need to know. Do people practice what they preach? No one who has any amount of smarts in the world would believe someone who doesn't practice what they preach. No one would take financial advice from someone who's in massive amounts of debt. No one would take their car to get fixed by someone who's, never been a mechanic, never done any of that work before in their life. You know what I mean? So, like I say, just for starters, I mean, this is, let's just assume that none of this contradictions and all this kind of stuff exists. That's the first thing I have to point out. There's other stuff too. Getting back, going past that, you have the AOCs of the world who, in their Green New Deal, which is kind of the gold standard for climate change agreements and climate change policy nowadays, that have said openly that the goal of the Green New Deal and obviously the goal of climate change policy is to implement socialism, is to give the government more power. They don't actually care about that. The Green New Deal talked a lot more about socialism and all this kind of stuff than it did about actually helping the climate. And that's something that it really bothers me because we, like I say, like I mentioned a million times over, but like always say, I'm going to keep mentioning it. People always talk nowadays about this political divide. And, politics is so divided nowadays. Well, why is it? And like I always say, it's because we have one side. I mean, the conservatives do this to an extent, but it's not nearly the same for the main reason that they don't have to lie about their intentions because their intentions are pretty obvious and more just and more moral and ethical, and that the left always has to lie. That's why you have Elizabeth Warren, who has almost the exact same policy positions as Bernie Sanders, but yet she has to lie and say, "Oh no, we're not going to raise our taxes." And then, in the debate, Bernie Sanders says, "Yeah, we're going to have to raise taxes." Like it's obvious. Like Bernie's the kind of guy that's so crazy that he actually believes that this kind of stuff, and he's flat out open with it. Like you're crazy when like. At least Warren's smart enough to know that she has to lie to people to get it through. But getting back to the climate change part, it's about socialism. That's the only thing that it matters. And you have all these people, the you have the Bernie Sanders campaigners even now too. The the little literal communist ones. They're talking about climate change and how, we're gonna have to put people in re-education camps to get our point across. And yeah, this stuff's it's pretty scary, but I mean, there's not really a lot of good news because the government and schools and all this kind of stuff is pushing it on people. So I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. But for the time being, the best thing to know is to point out to people that aren't already awake is that if the goal was to actually help the climate, your first goal would be talking to and addressing the situation with China and India, because I think they put out like 2/3 of global CO2. Canada puts out like literally 1%. And not only that, the forests in Canada, I mean, I've heard conflicting reports. Some people say it completely offsets it, some say it doesn't quite. But focusing your time in Canada is like, it's absolutely insane. Like, it's like saying we're going to crack down on crime, but we're only going to crack down on, petty thieves who steal like less than $100. We're going to let the murderers go free. We're going to let the rapists go free. We're going to let the bank robbers and like the actual thieves. But we're going to crack down on the petty thieves because those are the people. We're going to crack down on the people who speed. We're going to crack down on the people who like what I mean, minor stuff. But like he points out here, China is already a far left communist country. India is not necessarily the same, but I mean, it's not a first world country, so I mean, they don't really care about that. They want like I said, the goal is socialism. The goal is having the government to have as much power as possible, and that's what you want when you're on the left. I mean, that's the fundamental difference between the left and the right. People always try to point out different policy positions, but that stuff changes all the time. So the main difference is that the left wants the government to have more power because they don't trust themselves to be able to accumulate resources and survive for themselves, basically. And the right doesn't because they're confident enough in themselves that they view that they can survive without big, massive government giant programs to prop them up. It's really just, I mean, a lot of it's trying to fit in. I mean, a lot of people that their political beliefs is just go along to get along, but in general, you can genuinely tell the kind of people. Like, how many entrepreneurs are socialists? Like, that's like an oxymoron, basically. So basically, like I say, to sum it up, the goal of environmentalism, the goal of the climate change alarmists is socialism. That's what they want. That's what they've always wanted, and they're honest about it. It's not like they're lying. It's not like we're assuming or making, rash judgments. They literally say it. The guy who came up with the Green New Deal with AOC admitted it. Like, how much more evidence do we need for the people that don't already understand this stuff? But anyway, I think I've gone on long enough. I'm gonna leave it there. If you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.